Herbert Hoover is one of the most misunderstood presidents in American history. Some remember him only for the Great Depression. Others forget that before becoming president, he was one of the most successful humanitarian leaders in the world. But his real story is much deeper. It is a story of intelligence, global experience, wealth, and one of the most difficult presidencies in American history. Before the White House, before political crisis, before economic collapse, Herbert Hoover was just a boy from a small town in America. His journey began far from power. Herbert Hoover was born on August 10, 1874, in West Branch. His full name was Herbert Clark Hoover. His childhood was not wealthy or luxurious. In fact, it was the opposite. Hoover grew up in a Quaker family that valued discipline, hard work, and simplicity. But tragedy struck early. By the age of 9, he had lost both of his parents. He became an orphan. This experience changed his life forever. He was sent to live with relatives and learned early how to survive independently. No comfort, no protection, no safety net. Only responsibility. That shaped his character. Hoover learned to rely on himself, to solve problems, to stay calm under pressure. These traits would later define his entire career. Then education changed his future. Hoover was not an outstanding student at first, but he was extremely intelligent and practical. He studied engineering at Stanford University. He was part of the university's first graduating class in 1895. At Stanford, Hoover focused on geology and engineering. He was especially interested in mining and resource management. After graduation, he did not stay in America. He went global. Hoover worked as a mining engineer around the world, in Australia, China, and many other countries. He quickly built a reputation as a highly skilled professional. Smart, efficient, reliable, and soon, he became very wealthy. By his early 30s, Hoover was already a millionaire. But money was not his final goal. His real impact came when the world needed help. In 1914, World War I began. Millions of people were displaced. Food shortages spread across Europe. Civilians were starving. Hoover did something extraordinary. He organized massive humanitarian relief efforts. He helped feed millions of people in war-torn Europe. He coordinated international food distribution. He managed logistics on a global scale. He became known as the Great Humanitarian. Not because of politics, but because of action. He saved lives on a massive scale. This made him famous worldwide. People respected him not as a politician, but as a problem solver. After the war, Hoover continued serving in government roles, including Food Administration work under presidents. He built a reputation as a highly capable administrator. Efficient, logical, non-political. And that reputation eventually pushed him toward the highest office in the United States. But nothing could prepare him for what was coming. By the late 1920s, America was booming economically. Industry was growing. Stock markets were rising. Optimism was everywhere. In 1928, Hoover ran for president as a Republican candidate. He promised prosperity, efficiency, continued economic growth. He won by a landslide. And in 1929, Herbert Hoover became the 31st President of the United States. He entered office with confidence and global respect. But history was about to change everything. Because within months, the American economy would collapse, and Hoover's presidency would be tested like never before. When Herbert Hoover entered the White House in 1929, America was full of optimism. The economy was strong. Businesses were growing. The stock market was rising rapidly. Many people believed the country had entered a new era of endless prosperity. But that illusion did not last. Then everything collapsed in a single moment. In October 1929, the American stock market crashed in what became known as the Wall Street crash of 1929. Panic spread instantly. Investors lost fortunes overnight. Banks failed. Businesses shut down. Millions of people lost their jobs. The United States entered the worst economic crisis in its history, the Great Depression. And Hoover, a man known for efficiency and engineering logic, suddenly faced a problem no one had fully experienced before. A collapsing economy on a massive scale. The nation looked to Hoover for answers. At first, Hoover believed the crisis could be managed without extreme government intervention. He encouraged businesses to maintain wages. He urged cooperation between companies. He supported limited federal action. He believed the economy would naturally recover. But the situation got worse. Much worse. Unemployment rose dramatically. Factories closed. Families lost homes. Bread lines formed in cities across America. Shanty towns appeared, temporary settlements built from scrap materials. These were later called Hoovervilles by angry citizens. The name reflected public frustration. As suffering grew, so did criticism. Many Americans felt that Hoover was not doing enough. Even though his administration did take action, including public works projects and attempts to stabilize banks, the relief felt too slow for millions of desperate people. The public mood turned against him. He became a symbol of economic failure in the eyes of many Americans. Protests increased. Anger spread. Trust collapsed. Hoover, once respected as a global humanitarian hero, now faced intense political backlash at home. He was blamed for a crisis that was larger than any single leader. But public perception is powerful in politics. And Hoover's name became tied to hardship. Meanwhile, the political world was preparing for change. As the Great Depression continued, opposition grew stronger. People wanted new solutions, new leadership, new hope. In the 1932 election, Hoover faced Franklin Roosevelt. Roosevelt promised a New Deal for Americans. A different approach. More direct government action. The contrast was clear. Hoover represented caution and limited intervention. Roosevelt represented active change and relief programs. The American people chose change. Hoover lost the election in a landslide. But Hoover's story did not end there. When he left office in 1933, Herbert Hoover was deeply criticized. Many people saw him only through the lens of the Great Depression. But history would later reveal something more complex. Because Hoover was not just a president during crisis, he was also a humanitarian who spent decades helping others around the world. And his legacy would eventually be re-evaluated in a more balanced way. When Herbert Hoover left the White House in 1933, he was one of the most criticized political figures in America. For many people, his name was connected with the Great Depression, unemployment, and suffering. But what happened after he left office surprised many Americans. Hoover did not disappear from public life. Instead, he slowly returned to what he knew best: organization, service, and large-scale problem-solving. Even after political defeat, Hoover remained highly active. He was respected internationally for his intelligence and experience. Governments still asked for his help in evaluating economic and humanitarian issues. He became involved in commissions, reports, and advisory roles focused on improving government efficiency. In a way, he returned to the role that first made him famous: a global problem solver. Then history gave him a chance to rebuild his reputation. During and after World War II, Hoover was once again called to assist with humanitarian efforts. Despite political differences with presidents of the time, his expertise was still valued. He worked on food relief planning and international aid strategies. His experience from earlier humanitarian missions made him extremely useful in large-scale logistics and crisis management. This reminded the world of something important: Hoover had once been the great humanitarian. Not a failed president, but a man who had saved millions of lives before entering politics. Slowly, public perception began to change. Over time, historians started to re-evaluate Hoover's presidency. They began to ask a different question: was Hoover truly responsible for the Great Depression? Or was he a leader facing a global economic collapse that no one fully understood at the time? The truth was more complex than earlier criticism suggested. The economic crisis was massive, global, and systemic. No single leader could control it alone. Hoover's actions, though debated, were part of early attempts to respond to an unprecedented disaster. In his later years, Hoover lived long enough to see his image slowly shift. As decades passed, he became more respected for his broader life achievements. He was recognized again for his humanitarian work before the presidency. He was acknowledged for his intelligence and organizational skill. And he became a symbol of how public opinion can change over time. Hoover lived to see other presidents, other crises, and a changing America. He witnessed how history continued moving forward long after his presidency ended. And he remained engaged in writing, advising, and reflecting on government and leadership. Herbert Hoover left behind a complicated legacy. To some, he was the president of hardship. To others, he was a misunderstood leader during the worst economic crisis in modern history. And to many historians, he remains both: a capable humanitarian who faced an impossible presidency. His story is a reminder that history is rarely simple. Leaders are not defined by one moment, but by an entire lifetime of actions, decisions, and circumstances. And Herbert Hoover's life shows exactly that.